In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, the U.S. Justice Department accuses Chinese officials of coordinating a decade-long espionage campaign to steal IP and data from dozens of companies around the world. We'll talk about the fallout of this extensive hack attack. Plus, another legal win for Qualcomm. The chipmaker claims another victory over Apple in Germany. Will the iPhone maker have to change its strategy? And the billions that Netflix is spending on content is paying off with massive subscriber gains and big awards. But will its first mover advantage be under threat in 2019? First to our top story, the United States has accused 2 Chinese nationals of coordinating with Chinese security officials in a decade-long campaign against dozens of companies in the United States and abroad to steal intellectual property and other data. Assistant U.S. Attorney General Rod Rosenstein outlined his case before the press.
Our department has repeatedly cast a spotlight on China for its state-sponsored criminal activity targeting American corporations. More than 90% of the department's cases alleging economic espionage over the past 7 years involve China. More than 2/3 of the department's cases involving thefts of trade secrets are connected to China.
This in the midst of rising trade tensions between the U.S. and China. We are joined now by Tom Schoenberg, who covers enforcement for Bloomberg News, as well as Sam Sachs, cybersecurity policy fellow and China digital economy fellow at New America. So, Tom, what do we know about these charges?
Well, we know that they're computer intrusion conspiracy charges. And essentially what the government's saying here is that for 12 years, a couple of hackers who were tied to the Chinese government were infiltrating both U.S. companies and U.S. agencies using traditional hacking tactics, phishing, then installing malware, and in the process, stealing all sorts of intellectual property and other data from these companies for a long period of time.
Now, Sam, presumably these kind of hack attacks are happening all the time. So what stands out about this one?
I think this is a big deal, and it's a big deal because it comes at a time when we are negotiating with China over a trade war, and what it says is China is in breach of a 2015 agreement made by Xi and Obama not to conduct cyber-enabled industrial espionage. So in this situation, how are we supposed to believe anything that they bring to the table in a trade negotiation? And it also comes at a time when you also have a traditional espionage case, you have a case involving violations of sanctions by Huawei. So this sends a strong signal from the U.S. saying China flouts the rules. They don't play fairly.
So, Tom, who are the victims here? Which companies are we talking about?
Well, what's interesting is the U.S. actually doesn't name any of the companies who were breached here, besides the government agencies, which is NASA and their Jet Propulsion Unit, as well as the U.S. Navy. In terms of the companies, the best way they would describe it is just a whole list of areas. I mean, from automotive to telecommunications to banking and financial services. I mean, nearly every industry you could think of was, a victim of this hack, according to the U.S.
So, Sam, in the context of the tension that is already escalating, how do you expect this to be received by the Chinese government?
This is just another data point which says the U.S. is in we are potentially in a Cold War with China. Technology and cyber is front and center, and even as we're talking about tariffs, the issues that the U.S. has run much deeper. There are some that might speculate there's no deal to be had. This is a much broader campaign.
In speaking with many business people who travel between the U.S. and China, there is a lot of concern that you use the words Cold War, but that this is going to go on for a long time, that the relationship between the U.S. and China has been permanently or at least damaged for the long term. Would you agree?
I see the U.S.-China relationship at a very fragile moment, and I think in the tech space, it's potentially going over a cliff. I think that these are long-standing issues. I mean, look, this case, the indictment, this is not a recent case. It's been going on since the Obama administration. But now we're in an environment where the U.S. government is not holding back because what worked in the past didn't work, and it's a recalibration of the relationship.
Tom, what are next steps in this case?
Well, these two individuals are not in custody. Presumably, they're still in China, which we don't have an extradition treaty with China. So kind of getting them in custody without some type of deal with China, it's unlikely we're going to see them in the United States. So what this really does, I mean, I think is set a narrative the government wants to set that, look, despite having this 2015 policy or agreement in place, it's being violated, and really trying to, publicize that for the world. And this is one in a string of cases that the Justice Department has brought, and they're planning to bring more as part of this China initiative that they announced last month.
All right, well, we're going to continue to bring you developments as we have them. Bloomberg's Tom Schoenberg, Sam Sachs with New America. Thank you both. Well, first China, and now Qualcomm is seeing another legal victory in Germany in its patent fight against Apple. A court in Munich says Qualcomm can block sales of some iPhone models, but the ban won't start immediately. Qualcomm has accused Apple of infringing on its patents. Earlier this month, China said it would ban sales of certain iPhones. For more, I want to bring in Bloomberg Tech's Ian King. So, Ian, what makes this ruling in Germany significant is that we're talking about hardware here, not software, as was the case in China.
That's absolutely correct. The idea being that if it's software, you basically put your programmers to work, they rewrite the code, there's an update push to the phones, and everybody gets on with their life. Contrary to that, here it's related to hardware, which implies that if you're not successful on appeal, you have to redesign your phone, you have to put new parts in there, and that creates a lot more trouble for the phone manufacturer.
But again, we're talking about older iPhone models, correct?
That's correct, yes. I mean, everything up until the recent announcement that we saw this year of the new models. But obviously, Qualcomm has already said, at least in the China case, that it intends to seek an extension of the ban to the latest models.
And could the same thing happen in Germany?
You have to assume that that's what they're going to try and do to have the maximum impact on them.
Now, we've seen a war of words between the companies. The lawyer for Apple's contract manufacturers was on the show earlier this week. He said he doesn't believe Apple has much to worry about with this China ban. Take a listen.
It's not a blow at all. It really is part of Qualcomm's distraction technique. They went in secret and got an order. My clients, the companies that build the iPhones and iPads, didn't even know about it. But it turns out it's an order that relates to software. It doesn't have anything to do with the cellular technology that's at issue in the lawsuits that we have against Qualcomm for my clients, where we're seeking about $9 billion in damages.
Meantime, Qualcomm's general counsel thinks otherwise. Take a listen.
This is clearly something that was substantively ruled on, and the order is something that needs to be taken very seriously, unlike Apple seems to be. And I would, if it were my company, I would have immediately indicated that I would be abiding by this court order and following it to the letter.
Now, Ian, there are so many open cases going on around the world, but these last two rulings do appear to indicate that the momentum is in Qualcomm's favor.
Well, I mean, there's two sides to it, right? There's the Qualcomm angle is to use patents to try and hurt its former customer Apple's shipments, to slow them down, to make them come to the negotiating table. But we've got another court case coming up, the FTC case against Qualcomm, which is essentially Apple's arguments against Qualcomm are going on trial in early January. So far, the judge there has been restrictive in saying, well, you can't argue this Qualcomm, you can't argue that Qualcomm. So at this point, we don't really know, but Qualcomm's attempts to force bans appear to at least have some audience with the courts in China and in Germany.
What's been Apple's response to the German ruling?
Yeah, well, they came out and said, look, we're going to take a couple of phones off the shelves in our stores, but don't worry, the 7 and the 8 are still going to be on sale through our resellers, so don't worry about it, and we'll deal with it, we'll appeal, and we'll see what we can do.
Does it seem that Apple is going to need to change its strategy?
Too early to say. I mean, clearly, they can afford to carry this fight on much longer than Qualcomm can do. They have a lot more money. They're in, you're arguably a financially stronger position. So why wouldn't they appeal? Why wouldn't they push this further? Why wouldn't they see if they can put more, pressure back on Qualcomm in other courts?
All right, fascinating. So many twists and turns. Ian King, always appreciate you keeping us updated. Thank you so much for stopping by. Coming up, Facebook is once again seeing negative headlines and pushback, but will it really impact the growth of the social network in the long run? And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Facebook is facing more government scrutiny amidst new revelations. It cut special data deals with 150 companies, including Spotify and Netflix, sharing more information about its users than it disclosed. The company has been sued by Washington, D.C., and more lawsuits from the states could follow. This on top of an inquiry by the FTC, and the DOJ and SEC are both investigating the company as well. We're taking a deeper dive on how all of this will impact Facebook growth in the long term. For more, I want to bring in Jitendra Rawal with Bloomberg Intelligence. So, Jitendra, is this going to hurt Facebook or not?
Well, long term, you have to look at two things. If you zoom out of all these regulatory issues right now, it's giving an opportunity for Amazon, for Google to gain market share. Amazon is taking advertising extremely seriously, and if they end up, buying somebody like a Snap and take that social media aspect that they have been pushing for a while even more seriously, they have an opportunity to take market share. Google, on the other hand, I think Google's mobile search potential is still underestimated. If you look at how much search has changed, when you used to search on mobile before, there used to be page 1 to 10,000, whatever number. Now it's load more. It's become more of an app experience. It's becoming more and more important for you to be there from an ad perspective on mobile search because of what Google is doing. So I think there's market share.
That's ads. What about users? I have this chart which shows that the number of people using Facebook every single day continues to grow 20%. Yeah. 20% of the world's population using Facebook every single day, and yet we had Rich Greenfield of BTIG on the show earlier this week. He doesn't think this is going to have an impact on growth. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Consumer usage of Facebook Blue, kind of the core application, has been in decline, not in terms of users as much as just time spent has been shifting. And without a doubt, that time's been shifting to Instagram. And you've seen explosive growth of Instagram over the past couple of years. I think that's very much unchanged. And so I think consumers love using these applications. They continue to love using these applications. There isn't a great alternative.
There isn't a great alternative other than not using them at all. And so does that mean this isn't really going to impact user growth?
User growth near term, no. Instagram, like Rich was mentioning, that the engagement keeps on improving. But if you look at within Instagram, it's mostly on stories part. So that's what's shaping up the outlook for Facebook for next year. First half, they have to convince advertisers that they can provide the same return on investment that they used to on newsfeed with live stories. Out of all the problems that Facebook has today, one thing we are most confident about is they will be able to crack live stories, mostly in the second half of the year. So first half, I think it's more about figuring out how the monetization potential there, and also dealing with all these risks with regulations, with potential fines and things like that. So it's a story of two halves, with the show me story being in the first half.
What about messaging?
So messaging is a very important point for the long-term growth story here. Messaging needs two things. One is you need a very strong payment gateway, a trusted payment network to enter things like customer support, e-commerce, enabling payment through messaging, and things like that. And the second thing you need is partnerships. So with all the news stories that are coming out and all these scandals, partnerships regulatory approvals, payment gateway, those things become more challenging. So they have to figure those things out. And while that's
is it Apple? That's the big competitor
exactly,
here?
You're right there. So Apple's business chat, basically, they are integrating businesses with Apple Pay in a web page. Basically, you could chat with somebody from a business directly, use the payment network if you want to. So they are there in the developed markets to give Facebook the competition. Now, both of them are going through different strategies to monetize messaging, but I feel what's going to hold Facebook back for a bit is this regulatory hurdle, this difficulty in striking payment network issues and difficulty in or maybe delays in striking partnership
Are they going to
deals.
figure out how to monetize WhatsApp?
I'm more confident about live stories monetization, Facebook cracking live stories monetization than Messenger and WhatsApp, at least for 2019. It's going to take time. First, they have to address, the misinformation issues, and again, going back to the regulatory aspect of things, those things need to be addressed first, and then the monetization aspect could come in. So investors will need to adjust the timeline, if you may, if not the potential.
Okay. Bloomberg's Jitendra Rawal, thank you so much for breaking that all down. Coming up, Foxconn's Terry Gou has big ambitions in America and isn't backing down, even in the midst of a trade war between the U.S. and China. This is Bloomberg. Altria has made it official. The tobacco giant is spending $12.8 billion for a 35% stake in Juul, the e-cigarette maker, in an effort to offset declines in cigarette sales. The deal values Juul at, get this, $38 billion. And makes it one of Silicon Valley's most valuable privately held companies. The tie-up more than doubles Juul's valuation from just a few months ago, when it was valued at $16 billion after Tiger Global Management led a $1.2 billion investment in the company. Meantime, Foxconn is known for being the biggest assembler of iPhones. Terry Gou, the chair and largest shareholder of Foxconn, he is also Taiwan's richest man. This is the story of how Gou turned a small operation in a shed into the biggest electronics operation on the planet. Now he is building a $14.5 billion factory in Wisconsin.
If you open an iPhone, this is what you'd see. All these parts were put together by a company called Foxconn. Many of the parts themselves are manufactured by Foxconn. Almost any piece of electronics has at least some components from the company, which is owned by this guy, billionaire Terry Gou. He found success by making massive deals with the world's biggest tech companies and being able to follow through.
He's always put client delivery number one, even at times if that means taking a loss or taking big risks on buying equipment or setting up facilities, because he's confident that once he lands that order, they're going to be stuck with him, and it's usually the case.
He's even expanded operations into the US by building a $14.5 billion factory in Wisconsin. This is how one man turned a small operation in a shed into the biggest electronics operation on the planet. Foxconn is one of the largest employers in the world, with over 1 million workers during peak iPhone season. And that's a commodity politicians like to offer during election time, jobs. So when it came time for President Donald Trump and various US states to decide where they wanted the promised factory, Gou had them playing against each other for the best offer.
And Wisconsin took the bait and offered a lot. They offered massive incentives to get Foxconn there. Really one of the largest incentive packages in US history.
Critics say the factory will most likely not create as many jobs as promised, and people are calling it a white elephant. But Gou doesn't care. Wisconsin is paying him $4.5 billion in taxpayers' money, or $1,800 per taxpayer.
We've got a Green Bay Packers jersey with your name on it.
At the end of the day, Terry Gou is a big winner, and it's yet to be seen whether Wisconsin will be a winner.
Other countries have sought similar deals, including Brazil, Indonesia, and even various Chinese provinces. And that's because Gou has a reputation for being able to pull off massive operations, offering companies a one-stop shop for electronics.
And there's no other company in the world that can do what Terry Gou does, even 2 decades later. Foxconn is still the master of assembly. And it's because Terry Gou is always looking to try and, look ahead and try and keep customers happy.
Early on, Gua saw opportunity by streamlining processes via automation and cutting out the middlemen. In the 1970s, Taiwan had a booming export economy. But most electronics from that time were made in Japan, where the factories were, and then traded in Taiwan, who had the connections to the Western world. A 23-year-old Gua worked as a shipping clerk and got a first-hand view of the potential to make money.
He realized, well, you know, there's money in this. Maybe I should go out on my own and do some of this. Why be the person in the middle when I can be the one doing the actual original production?
He decided to go into business for himself. Using a $7,500 loan from his mother, he rented a shed in a gritty Taipei suburb called Tucheng, bought a couple of plastic molding machines, and started making channel-changing knobs for black and white televisions. After that, he had a series of big breaks, starting with making components for Atari and later Dell. At that time, Dell and other PC companies would buy parts from their suppliers and assemble them in their own factories. But Gua created a production line integrating most of these parts and processes, from the raw steel for PC casings and electrical connectors to the final assembly. Gua was also among the first wave of Taiwanese to set up factories in mainland China.
He saw the writing on the wall in the 70s that this was a place to do business, to build things, to manufacture things, not only at a low labour rate, but there was just going to be plentiful staff. All these years later, 40 years later, it's almost the most perfect government corporate partnerships in history.
Eventually, Gua landed a deal with Apple, and the rest is history. Over 50% of their estimated $165 billion in revenue now comes from Apple. But it wasn't always going smoothly. Foxconn hit international headlines in 2010 after a series of workers' suicides at their main factory in Shenzhen.
And to put it in context, the suicide rate in China is around 20 per 100,000. Terry Gua had about 1 million people working for him at the top of the annual cycle. So that would imply 200 suicides a year. But they had, 14. Well below average, but certainly higher than anyone expected. And because this was a company supplying to Apple, it became famous very, very quickly as the Apple supplier and the suicide problem.
After the 2010 scandals, he raised wages, set up healthcare clinics, and even set up hotlines to give advice to help workers. Foxconn weathered the crisis, but it was already facing a bigger long-term issue. For the past decade, revenue for electronic hardware manufacturing has decreased, and software is on the up. Almost all the world's biggest tech companies are now non-hardware. Gua, who is a manufacturer at heart, hasn't been able to diversify products.
Foxconn has been trying for years to get into things like cloud services, software, but they're just not very good at it. Terry Gua doesn't have that creative thinking. He doesn't look at a product and say, how can I add value and charge more for it? And that's the biggest challenge facing Foxconn into the future.
Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Streaming has become the next gold rush for media companies, and Netflix has competitors racing to catch up. It's been a banner year for the streaming giant, with nearly 29 million total subscriber additions expected this year, over 676 hours of new original content, and its first box office debut. It even took the Emmys by storm with 112 nominations.
NBC has the most nominations of any broadcast network.
That's right. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like being the sexiest person on life support. It's not great.
Still not looking great.
Not great. Not great for you guys. No.
Netflix, of course, has the most nominations tonight. That's right. That's right. And if you're a network executive, that's the scariest thing you can possibly hear. Except maybe Sir Ronan Farrow is on line one.
But it is not just smooth sailing ahead for Netflix. Competition is on the horizon, with Disney, AT&T, possibly NBC planning their own rival over-the-top services. Joining us now from New York to discuss, eMarketer principal analyst Paul Verna, and in Connecticut, we've got True Optics CEO and co-founder Andre Swanson. Andre, Netflix nominated for a lot of Golden Globes as well, more than the other streaming services, more than HBO. Is 2019 going to be as smooth?
No, it won't be.
Why not?
I think Netflix has never really had to face direct competition for audience attention. They were the first mover in terms of an over-the-top streaming service, and really had a head start in terms of not only licensing content, but producing content specifically for streaming. You mentioned Disney, AT&T, potentially NBC Universal. There's also a lot of free streaming solutions that are gaining rapid market share. There's no barrier to entry in terms of technology, and so I think 2019 is going to be a year where it's very challenging for Netflix to kind of maintain that market dominance.
This as the company continues to spend billions and billions of dollars on original content. We don't get a lot of information on viewership from Netflix, but this year they actually did release a list of their top 10 most binge-watched shows. Paul, some of the usual suspects weren't actually even on this list. So how successful does this indicate Netflix's original content strategy has been?
Well, I think it's important to distinguish between the most binge-watched shows and the most watched overall. It doesn't mean that if a show is being binge-watched that it's necessarily the most popular show. But I think all of that is academic when you look at the bigger picture, which is that Netflix is driving a lot of new subscribers to the service and retaining a lot of subscribers, mostly with originals, also with the content they license. And I would push back a little on Andre's point that they've never had direct competition, because I think Hulu and Amazon are certainly direct competitors. Obviously, the competition is going to intensify in 2019 with Disney, AT&T, and others. But I think Netflix has not only the early mover advantage, but also just a great wealth of content in its portfolio.
And yet there's a criticism that it's quantity over quality. I mean, they do have this new movie Roma out now. Some of the reviews have been mixed. The launch didn't come off as smoothly as perhaps Netflix would have liked. Andre, do you think Netflix is doing too much?
It's funny because I have in the past thought that Netflix might be overextending itself in terms of the amount of money that it was spending on developing new content and licensing content, particularly not just domestically, but also trying to fight on multiple front lines overseas as well, where they're competing against media companies in Brazil, say Global TV or iFlix in Southeast Asia, that already have a lot of the local content rights. But I would say Netflix is doing exactly what they would have to do because they knew that at some point the economies of scale would switch, and then a lot of the content that they were most reliant on for subscriber acquisition and growth would be pulled from them from the likes of Disney and others. So I think they've really for 3 years now, if not more, been kind of planning to how they could fend off the coming battles. I would say Amazon and Hulu historically have not really been legitimate competitors because the amount of money that they were spending for original content and licensing of content was not in the stratosphere of what Netflix was. That is now catching up as well, and they're also, I think, going to be more legitimate competitors than they were previously.
Paul, Netflix has really high-profile content deals with talent like Shonda Rhimes, the Obamas. Are we going to see the fruits of that this coming year?
Yeah, that's a long-term strategy, and I think it does take a while for the kinds of shows that the people you mentioned, plus some others, Kenya Barris, those things take a while to develop. But yeah, I think we're going to start seeing the fruits of that. I think even with some of the things that they've been doing lately, like with Bruce Springsteen, they're working with Ellen DeGeneres. I think that kind of celebrity-driven strategy is going to pay off for them eventually.
Andre, what about international? This is the first year that Netflix overseas revenue surpassed U.S. revenue. Where should we be looking for Netflix to make some huge gains and perhaps also run into some challenges abroad?
Yeah, so I mean, I think everybody's known that international is going to be where the real opportunity for growth is. Domestically in the United States, you have about 80 million over-the-top connected TV homes. It's several times more than that internationally, and markets like Latin America and in Asia are growing significantly faster than North America. So there's definitely going to be tons of opportunity. I think the challenge for Netflix, again, is going to be pricing in some of those markets is going to be difficult to increase pricing. Also, the amount of money that they're going to have to spend on original content is going to be very high, because the popular content in many of those markets, they just will not have the rights to for the next few years because it's been locked up already. The other challenge that I'll mention, and I think that's going to be very interesting as we look into 2019, 2020. Disney is more than just a content company. They're a whole entertainment experience and kind of a lifestyle with the merchandising and the theme parks. And I think one of the things that may be interesting as Netflix has invested a lot of money in content is what are the other things that they can do to diversify their revenue streams outside of just subscription revenue.
Paul, how does Netflix do that? I mean, the Disney situation is a double whammy, because not only are they launching their own streaming service, they're pulling some of their content off of Netflix.
Absolutely. And yes, I think if not 2019, then maybe 2020 will be a year when Netflix is really forced to either reinvent itself or pivot, do something different from what it's doing now, which is a very simple, straightforward business based on subscriptions. There's a ceiling to that, and I think they're getting close to that ceiling in the US. They're not as close to it in overseas markets, particularly some of the ones that Andre mentioned. But yes, I think there's going to come a time when that business model is going to run its course and Netflix is going to have to do something different. I wish I could tell you what that might be, but I think if I knew what it was, I'd be sipping a tropical drink on my veranda in my Caribbean village right now.
In the meantime, the rest of us will be holiday binge watching, Paul. Thank you so much for stopping by. eMarketer's Paul Verna and True Optics CEO Andre Swanston. Meantime, Twitter shares fell dramatically on Thursday after a new report from Citron Research. The firm cites a report by Amnesty International that says Twitter is a toxic place for women who use the platform. According to the report, 7% of tweets that prominent women in government and journalism receive were abusive or problematic. Citron went on to declare Twitter has become the Harvey Weinstein of social media. Looking back on 2018, Twitter stock gained more than 20%, while its tech peers saw declines. Here to discuss, Bloomberg Sarah Frier. Sarah, you and I have both been on the receiving end of some of these tweets. Sometimes we're in the same tweet. So This is nothing new. What's significant about this report?
Well, the significance is the attention it's receiving, in particular from Citron, which has a reputation for going after companies and successfully having sort of an activist position on them. And so that's one reason the stock is reacting so much, because we've seen a lot of talk about abuse on Twitter for just years. I mean, it's always been a problem there. But now the idea that that kind of abuse can affect the bottom line for the company and the prospects for it is something that really hasn't been addressed at this level by Wall Street before.
Right, something that we've all suspected.
Right.
However, so what does this mean? I mean, Twitter has, over and over again said they're working on it. They've got new measures. They have taken, in some ways, more dramatic steps than, let's say, Facebook. But what's next?
Well, Twitter needs to figure out where the line is going to be drawn. I mean, a lot of their decisions seem subjective and inconsistent, and they will make a decision, and then there will be a blow up. It's sort of similar to what we see with Facebook. There will be a blow up in the public. How did you decide that? Why did you decide that? And then Twitter will reverse its decision and say, actually, you're right, we made a mistake. And it's just this constant process of little things that don't make sense to everyday users. Meanwhile, you have broader concerns about what the company is deciding to take off its platform. Is it having bias against any certain kinds of people with opinions? And so I think abuse of women is certainly an area that it's it's hard. Are these opinions? Is this harassment? Is this credible? Are these threats credible against these women? So these companies have a very tough time coming to a consistent policy application.
Is this going to impact advertising, finally?
It always has a little bit. I mean, I think advertisers, when I talk to them, say that there is a brand safety issue on social media. You don't want your ad to show up next to one of these abusive comments. And I think Twitter's algorithmic ordering in the last couple of years has helped fix some of that. A lot of the worst of the worst doesn't get bubbled up to the top anymore the way it used to, but still a long way to go. And I think it helps that advertisement is sort of separate from the user posts on Twitter. But with video and other categories, new categories of advertising, that is more difficult.
All right, well, we're going to keep our eye on the impact of this report. Sarah Fryer, as always, thanks for stopping by. Coming up, the future of money, where we take a look at different aspects of how technology is disrupting the financial sector. This week, a UK startup that says it aims to become the Amazon of banking. Plus, Uber's self-driving cars are returning to Pittsburgh, but have the safety measures improved? This is Bloomberg. Amazon is still struggling in the grocery business, more than a year after it bought Whole Foods. According to a new study from UBS, the number of Amazon Prime members who shop for groceries on Amazon at least once a month actually fell this year. And the average Amazon online grocery order is smaller than that of those that use grocery delivery and pickup services from brick-and-mortar retailers. Time now for our feature on the future of money, where we take a look at how the digital world will impact money. London has been a hotbed for fintech startups, but Britain's decision to exit the European Union has complicated life for a lot of businesses. Now, UK fintech firms are looking to other European jurisdictions for licenses so they can trade within the bloc. The first London-based fintech to receive one is Revolut, a company that was awarded a license by Lithuania's central bank. Joining us to explain why, what it means for the business, is CEO and co-founder of Revolut, Nick Storonsky. Nick, thanks so much for joining us. So, Lithuania isn't exactly a jurisdiction known for financial transparency. Why there?
So Lithuania increasingly became a fintech hub for licenses. A lot of financial companies right now apply in Lithuania because of effectively digitalization, right? So, I mean, central bank there is very fintech friendly, and that's effectively application directly to ECB. So that's why we decided to apply through Lithuania to European Central Bank.
So obviously this license means you have more opportunity, but it also means you have more risk and will potentially need to hold a lot more capital. How do you handle that kind of risk? And couldn't that limit your growth?
Well, a lot of our customers were begging us for deposit taking, for direct debits, for other banking products. And then we decided approximately 1 year ago that we need to go for banking license, so we applied. For customer, it means €100,000 protection on their accounts, direct debits, and other products such as trading and so on.
To what extent do you think your growth has been due to a decision to appeal to the crypto community?
Reality, so we launched cryptocurrency last December, and yes, there was a huge jump in number of users, but at the moment cryptocurrency is less than 5% of our business, so I don't think it actually adds significantly to user growth numbers.
You've got plans to launch in the United States, 100,000 people already on the waiting list. How do you plan to compete with companies here like Robinhood?
Just offering much better products. So Robinhood is a trading app, while we plan to come to US and offer the whole range of banking services, including trading as well.
Saying that you aim to become the Amazon of banking, that is quite bold. What is the big vision here? What makes you think you can become the Amazon of banking?
Well, we are fast in developing new products. We have platform, we have a great team, we have resources to launch as many countries and then as many products as possible. And we already have a great track record in actually doing it, right? So right now we're live in 28 countries. We have more than 6 products on the platform, right? And then we're just continuing innovating and launching products that people need.
All right. Well, we'll continue to keep our eye on you, Revolut CEO and co-founder Nick Storonsky. Still ahead, Uber's self-driving car program getting a reboot after a fatal pedestrian accident. What changed? What's happened since? We'll discuss. We are, of course, live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology. Follow our Global Breaking News Network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. In the UK, London's Gatwick Airport was closed for 6 hours after reports of 2 drones flying over the field. That led to more than 24 incoming flights being diverted to other airports. Unmanned aerial vehicles are increasingly becoming a safety threat to airplanes. They are generally banned from operating near airfields. Uber self-driving cars are hitting the road again. 9 months after the death of a pedestrian in Arizona, Uber said it has received the all-clear from the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation this week to resume its autonomous vehicle testing in Pittsburgh. The company said it will return 1 or 2 self-driving cars to public roads in Pittsburgh, where testing will resume with more limitations and new safety measures, including improvements to braking and driver monitoring. Autonomous cars will also be deployed in San Francisco and Toronto to be driven in manual human-driven mode. Joining us to discuss, Bloomberg's Eric Newcomer. So what has Uber been doing since that accident up till now?
Reassessing, sort of, I think, on every level. So looking at these safety drivers, looking at what braking technology they use, sort of what's on and what's off, what they maintain from the sort of cars that they inherit. You know, they get this technology from automakers, and then they couple it with their own self-driving technology and how those to interact, but sort of a lot of work. And then I think also just changing processes and saying, okay, we're going to drive it at a slower speed. We're going to do it on a much smaller circuit here. You know, where they're going to be driving in Pittsburgh is just going to be a much smaller course than before.
Right, 1 or 2 self-driving cars. I mean, that's not very many. Where else are they testing them?
Yeah, and the sense I got was there isn't a lot of room necessarily on this course that you could sort of fill it with a ton of self-driving cars because it is so small. You know, in Toronto and San Francisco, they're in manual mode, which literally means a human being is driving the car. But the cars are, you know, these autonomous vehicles that take in data that Uber can use. And you'd imagine that sort of getting them back in manual mode is one step on the path to trying to get sort of them back in true autonomous mode.
What is going to be the importance of self-driving with the IPO coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a risk for Uber. It's certainly a major cost center. I mean, I think, you know, hundreds of millions. So I think that's going to be a risk for them. We talked to Dara Khosrowshahi a while ago now, and he said, you know, they were going to look at all sorts of ways that they could sort of spin it out or different financial sort of vehicles for the program. And I think that's still an open question, sort of what they do with the autonomous program. But they want it as an upside. You know, it's still good to be able to say, you know, whenever these vehicles are ready, we're sort of in the business of autonomous vehicles, but it's a major cost center.
And how is where Uber is in self-driving compared to Lyft?
You know, Lyft, I think, sort of more partnerships, started later. I think Uber has more of its own sort of self-driving vehicles out and about, but Lyft is sort of aggressively trying to catch up with the idea that they can partner, and also that just as time passes, it becomes easier to catch everybody else. That what was once novel is easier for a new company to sort of just play catch up.
Right. All right. Eric Newcomer, thanks for keeping us posted. Thank you. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. On Friday's show, we're going to look back at the biggest successes and blunders for Apple over the last year. Of course, we are live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology. Follow our Global Breaking News Network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.